Okay, so you can send me stuff at there or go to the website for previous editions. Okay, yeah, so last weekend we had People Parking Day in London. There's Brenda Pesh, who's Road Danger Reduction Forum Committee, who's very involved in all that, and she's been here to talk about parklets. Don't know where that one is, but yeah, anyway, there was big day last weekend. Right, I'm going to break two rules. Going to be related to cycle sport, and it's related to Europe. Very exciting men's road race and cycling world championships, which was held in Leuven. That's the Flemish, or it's otherwise known as Louvain. And of course, when I'm looking at spending 4 hours on Eurosport looking at bike races, I do, of course, look at the infrastructure. So here's a bit of the Belgian type infrastructure. There you go there. Bus bypass there, and there you've got cycle track in the other direction, which seems to be bi-directional there. Not quite sure what that's about. Belgian stuff tends to be all over the place. Actually, it's sort of something to do with Belgian characteristics, whether Flemish or Walloon. But what I did look up was that they had a traffic plan, and cycling now constitutes 41% of journeys made in the center of Louvain, with cars 54%. So it's a shift upwards from a third of trips involving bikes. There's a bit more. This is kind of more on the outskirts of Louvain. Not quite sure what's happening all around there, but some kind of path going across there and there. Okay, bit of European infrastructure. Right, report now on the impact of coronavirus pandemic on traffic and cycle statistics. Main findings. Cycling in 2020 compared to 2019, cycling stages per person increased by 23%. Miles cycling increased by 62%, indicating a lot of leisure use of bicycles during the pandemic. Walking stages down, but miles walked up, again, the same thing, leisure involved. So impact of less traffic, some pop-up cycle facilities to increase cycling. And you may also have read in The Guardian the gender impacts of that. So cycling trips made by women in England rose 50% in 2020. That was the interpretation of it, graphic done here by The Guardian. So the gender differential is still there, but it went up from women. It declined a little bit as perceptions of safety went up. So that's what you need to do. You need to reduce danger to get more women cycling. Okay, now here's something, thanks to Adam Tranter for bringing this up. You can listen to it there. This Transport Select Committee, House of Commons, and here's the Minister, Grant Shapps, saying we've got to not just go back to where we were before the pandemic. And he was referring to local authorities, saying sometimes they've tried something. He's referring to the Active Travel Fund schemes, pop-up cycle lanes, low traffic neighborhoods. Sometimes they've tried something and immediately walked away from it because perhaps actually because they don't realize it takes a while to bed in. You've got to allow things to settle before you U-turn on it. Yes. And he also said what's often forgotten is that every car you take off the road because someone decides to walk or cycle, it's a hell of a lot more road space, and it actually helps everybody, including the motorists. I'm not happy about that. I think that's the case for saying you need to take away the space once people have stopped driving on it. Otherwise, people will carry on driving. But anyway, nice to see him saying, you know, you've got to allow time before you pull out LTNs and cycle lanes. So that was good. Here's something from the Labour Party conference. Shadow Minister for Green Transport said, strike on while the iron is hot on active travel rather than rehashing old pledges. It's worrying that we've gone back to levels of pollution and congestion we had before COVID. Unless we make our roads safer for cyclists, the problem is only going to escalate. We need to see a proper plan from government to get people cycling, keep safe on our roads. Response from DFT. This is my all-time hate phrase, some of the safest roads in the world, which I've been on and on and on and on and on about how it's using the wrong metrics. But it did say, recently announced changes to the highway code, meaning those who present the most risk to other road users are given the greatest responsibility in creating a safer travel environment for all. That element of the hierarchy of danger from the new highway code, which should be out by the end of this year, is actually filtering through to various government statements. Right, here's a graph which Colin Reid brought up from DFT figures. So, motor vehicle stock up from 5 million in 1950, about 20 million in 40 years ago, now pushing up to 40 million, so nearly doubled the amount over the last 40 years. So at about the kind of time that, 30 years, beg your pardon. Since 1980, it's a more or less doubling. Since 1990, it's up from about 25 mil to about 35 towards 40. If you look at the average annual mileage, that's stayed more or less the same, really over 60 years. And you look at it and you think, oh, 15,000 sounds a lot, because normally we're talking about 6,000 to 8,000 miles per year, urban areas, and 8,000 to 10,000 miles on average. How come it gets up to 15,000? Well, that's because of freight and commercial vehicles. So that explains that number there. But that's what's been happening. For a place where it hasn't happened, thanks to Adam Reynolds for reminding us about what's happened in London over the last 20 years. Big decline, about 30% in central London, and overall for Greater London, it's about 15% decline. So it can be reversed, is the message. And some more figures going back 50 years. This is about household car availability, and the households with no car or van have dropped from 50% nearly in 50 years ago to only 21%. But it's still about a fifth of all households don't have access to a car or van. One car or van is staying more or less the same as 44%. The big increase has been from 8%, 36% of 2 or more cars or vans. So that's very dramatic, but still 1/5 of households in Great Britain, includes rural areas, don't have access to a car or van. Something else about purpose of car trip, changing from 2020 to 2019. Most common purpose is leisure, 30%, shopping, 22%, commuting is only 15%, other escort, 11%. These figures stayed the same between 2019 and 2020. And police crime and sentencing and courts bill, that's rumbling on, and the full brochure information sheet, which has been signed by all these organisations, you can email me for that. It's also up on the Cycling UK website. Okay, your victim blaming for tonight with spectacularly bad timing. Ealing Stars, just as Ealing has taken out low traffic neighborhoods. It's about help your kids behave sensibly on their route to school. It's a jungle out there. Well, it's partly a jungle out there because you took out the low traffic neighborhoods, Ealing Council. So that was a bit foolish. And they got a dreadful video produced by the London Road Safety Campaign, which is the absolutely perfect example of exactly what's wrong with traditional road safety thinking. Shows children as hyenas misbehaving in the street. So, do have and this is, a lot of road safety officers are employed in councils and produce that kind of stuff. And the idea that the streets are for cars and motor vehicle traffic is brought in there. That's where the ideology, the culture, which I'm going to be talking about later, kicks off. So it is important. Another Share the Road campaign. I'm not against these if they're done properly, but here's one done by Leicestershire Police, Share the Road. And it's done at a bike shop. That's not the kind of people you need to tell about that. And what we do know from policing of close passing is it has to involve motorists. It should involve a degree of enforcement with points, but getting the message over to motorists. There's no point turning up at a cycle show, as some police services do, and saying, look, we're doing this thing. No, don't tell us, go and tell the drivers. Here's some of the reading list. These I mentioned last week. Here's a good one on why EVs are not the answer. Don't forget, I've written an article on that on the RDRF website. It's about embodied carbon, and it's really worth a read to show you yet again why EVs aren't the answer. The All-Party Parliamentary Group and Cycling Walking report I mentioned last week. And here's a report from Chatham House on risk assessment about climate change. All worth a look. Just nothing special from the UK. There is something in Cheltenham, which the people from Cheltenham can have a couple of minutes on at the end of this. Don't forget consultations. You always have to fill in responses to the consultations, otherwise we won't get what we need. And in Ealing, I don't know what happened, but the cabinet was looking set to decide to take away LTNs, and I think that happened. If it didn't, do tell me. And Hackney, this is today. It's repurposing car parking, which we like. I think this is actually meant to be for where to put your dockless hire bikes. So it's the kind of docking, hence the cycle hire thing there, for the Lime and other dockless bikes that you might see around. They're supposed to be left there rather than on footways, but people seem to have put their ordinary bikes there. So, I don't know how that's going to pan out, but watch this space. And another photograph from this book for this, just to finish off this week. This is from Shirley Baker in the 60s in Manchester. She did a load in Manchester. Again, we got the lady wearing her carpet slippers outside. Tiny Tots brought out all the kids and are washing up. I mean, this does seem to be not an actual through road, more the sort of back alley, but it is available for cars to park in. So on a highway which is legally accessible to cars, you can still have kids and other human beings taking over. So that's that. And if we could have the people from Cheltenham, please, if that's possible.
It's just me, Bob. Don't worry. There's not a huge group of us. It's just me. So hi, I'm Chris from Cheltenham. So Bob suggested it's useful just to share a local story we had last week for a couple of minutes as well. So I'm just going to pop a slide up, which hopefully people can see. If someone can give me a wave. Yep. Yeah. Cool. Great. Lovely. So Bob asked me just a couple of minutes really on this. So this is something we went with last week around a transfer of just under £500,000 out of some Section 106 money. If you don't know Gloucestershire, don't know Cheltenham, so Cheltenham, big town, about 3 kilometres north of us, is a place that still likes to call itself a village with about 17,000 residents, lots of local employment, leisure centre, and opportunities really in terms of connecting up the two. Give you a bit of a flavour of the road conditions at the moment between the two. So fast 60-mile-an-hour country lanes, hemmed in, lots of no overtaking sections, hedges, and then sort of thoughts and prayer infrastructure at both ends. So painted cycles on the road and poor geometry, shared crossings, and various things. Both these routes are currently listed to have sort of capacity upgrades done to them. They've had several already. It's still not working. There's a lot of congestion. There's been basically a proposal for a parallel cycle route along here for a long time. Sustrans did some work a few years back on the route, but always seems to end up the bridesmaid, never a bride. We saw it in a very poorly prioritised EATF bid last year, which was rejected because they bid for 10 times more than the government was prepared to give them. But we also saw it in the JCS, so the Joint Core Strategy last year, where it had just been quietly racking up developer contributions and getting really close to being built, whilst we also had all these other capacity schemes knocking around. So we're beginning to feel optimistic it was soon to appear. And then in our geeky reading of cabinet papers, we spotted this one line buried at point 51 in the finance report this month. Basically, the council was transferring just under that £500,000 developer contribution from its capital budget away from the cycle track and into the capacity projects for the road projects in that area. We put a question, which I won't read through, but a question to Cabinet that essentially clarified, well, we've put a bid into the ATF for the cycleway, so don't worry, that'll get built at some point, and these funds will deliver essential parts of the future cycleway. Had a quick nosy at what the scheme that they put the money into actually delivers, and to my eye and to our eye, this doesn't look like a great active travel scheme. Stacking lengths, extra carriageways, thoughts and prayers maybe for future bits, some ASLs and a traffic signal upgrade. And indeed, actually, they are very honest in terms of saying this is capacity improvement, not active travel, and indeed actually identified the cycleway as a risk to their capacity improvements should it ever be delivered in the future. So we did quite a lot of soul searching as a campaign, I guess, on this in terms of whether we wanted a challenge or not, but decided that we would. So we ran some press, which didn't get picked up. Unfortunately, we didn't get any local press coverage, which is not unusual for us in this area. But we did get huge reach. We got 6,500% more sort of increase on our Facebook engagement. We've had a good number of reads and a lot of local councillors being badgered. Just really wanted to share a couple of reflections, I guess, with it as well. So one was we recognise the risk of widening the political gap with the council, but we've got such a car-centric local authority at the moment that we felt there wasn't a bridge to burn. Couple of risks just to flag, I guess, for people who are interested. Councils using the excuse of national funding as a reason to repurpose local money. Bit of a rush maybe to build the big roads whilst they still can and get works done. And would love to connect with anyone who's got any experience of dissecting road schemes, because we still want to kind of follow the money, I guess, going forward here to really test where that 435,000 has gone. It feels like the new cycle signals are almost just a tiny token on the edge of a big new traffic light junction. So yeah, thank you for the opportunity. That's been one of our experiences recently.
Yeah, thanks for that, Chris. Yeah, that was fascinating. That's the world we're in. All right, that's what's going on. So yeah, it's good for people to share. Has anybody got any points of order for Bob or extra things? I will say what you were talking about, Chris. I was just it popped up on my phone to read the Telegraph article with Gilligan and Will Norman going at each other about the money being taken away there. So we're starting to see that come through now. Simon, come on in before I dig myself any deeper.
No. Afternoon, evening. This is a very weird thing to be in the office. So I was just going to say that there's also the news from, I think, Conservative Friends of Cycling tweeted it last night, but Cambridge is rapidly rowing back on its removal of Mill Lane, various other schemes, etc. So I think that whole government approach, Gilligan saying essentially, you do bad things, we will do bad things to you, is starting to bite. And we're certainly hearing some stuff inside London along similar lines. So I think that's the first saber to rattle. the Telegraph, the Gilligan Norman thing. I've had a conversation with one of the parties involved there, and I think this is just gibberish journalism. This is old WhatsApps from ages back being kind of rehashed to try and confect a story. There's not a lot there other than just, Gilligan and Norman don't see eye to eye. Well, that's a big surprise. And Norman is quite keen to get some funding for London. Well, that's not a big surprise. And Gilligan is quite keen to punish bad councils. That's not a big surprise. But if you read it carefully, what it's not saying, which the Telegraph implies, is that Norman, for instance, doesn't want to punish bad councils, etc. So I think read into that Telegraph story very carefully what's actually the truth. Secondly, councils, beginning to see the results of being defunded and not like that very much at all. So I think that is a saber to rattle. And thirdly, I was about to put in the chat, Chris, I'm very happy always to chat to Cheltenham and Gloucester folks about campaigning. My immediate thought is just get more tabloidy on your headlines and your story and whatever. If this is a shocking outrage that the council's done that, say the first words up front are shocking and outrage, or something like that. Like less jargon, more anger is probably the right approach here. But very happy to help in any way I can, as ever.
I think just if I can come back briefly on that last one, I think one of the dilemmas we had is that it feels that this is political rather than officer-led in terms of the challenges, and I think we had a real dilemma as to how to do that. We nearly didn't say anything at all, but we couldn't get any engagement at all through the politics. So we tried not to be too sensational, I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, I'll bring a bit, but we've got a perfect intro to our first guest. It's almost like it's such a brilliant transition. But Simon, did you want to come back, or can I move over to Phil? You're good. Philip from Gloucestershire, come on.
Sorry, do you mind if I?
Simon?
Yeah, do you mind if I just jump in very quickly and say,
Please,
it's always a fine balance, and I'm not the expert in Cheltenham and Gloucester. You are clearly, so you've got to make the call you make. But I just think if your council is absolutely unwilling to do anything and then starts repurposing cycling money for road building, I think that's the moment at which you probably need to say that's not on, in fairly clear language. And that's the amazing thing in all of this as well, is like Gilligan, who is known for being a butt-kicking kind of guy, has said, I'm going to kick some butts on this. You're going to be defunded. And there's a load of councillors gone, no, we're not. No, this is all rubbish, etc. And now I suddenly go, oh, he really meant it when he said that. So I think the councils are not they've got slightly cloth ears when it comes to actually hearing, if you do this, you're in trouble. So I think being willing to say it very clearly, even in a very constructive, in a very polite and respectful way, but very clearly, I think is worth doing. Anyway, that's my piece out.
No, that's good. Philip, come on in. Good to see you.
Well, yeah, good to see you too, Brian. A bit of I rarely make these calls, unfortunately, but I do miss them catch up on Google. And just really to say that I work for Gloucestershire County Council, and this has come to my attention, although I don't work in that particular part of the council that was doing that scheme. So I've made some inquiries. I think it's not quite as it appears on the face of it. I need to let certain other colleagues of mine follow this up. I know that developer contributions are paid to councils for certain things, and sometimes those funds expire and they have certain deadlines and clawback periods. So sometimes money gets moved around on a temporary basis, but for governance reasons, it has to be kind of done in a certain public way. I think my honest view in this is that it's not as bad as it appears, but proof of the pudding will be in the eating. You're speaking to somebody or listening to somebody who is absolutely passionate about cycling, and I've met somebody who had his legs amputated after a collision with a vehicle on that road. Ever since that consultation, I've pushed for this scheme, and I won't stop.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Philip. There's always like two sides to the story. All right, we've had a fairly juicy start. I'm going to introduce like our main guest tonight, really, and I'm hoping we're going to come up with some juicy questions, because for me, Professor Peter Cox, who's coming on in a minute, is the best there is. Now, I know I said that when John Parkin and Rachel Aldred were on, but I didn't really mean it. I mean it about about Professor Cox. He's the best. I've pulled out 4 of his books behind me to show that, like, most of my bright ideas I kind of get secondhand from conversations with Peter in a pub when he kind of opens my mind a bit. So I'm going to ask Peter if he doesn't mind to talk about his latest book a little bit, and then that'll all get our juices flowing to ask one of, I think, the leading experts on sociology and cycling and politics in general. Peter, over to you. Enlighten us. There's a question. Good to see you. There we go. Get yourself comfy, and you better unmute.
Yeah, I didn't know really what you wanted me to say, but yeah, just the most recent thing we've been working on. Well, the thing that's just come out in paperback. Actually, it's a few years since we started working on it. A book to look at the politics of infrastructure, just to kind of make this point that there's a lot of kind of analysis going on academically that shifts the focus to kind of the technical requirements, the engineering stuff, and which is all absolutely necessary, but it kind of elides the problem of the politics of it. And so Till and I, Till Kullgren has done a lot of work in Sweden on these issues, and just kind of looking at how the city promises one thing, says another, and does a third, and the ways that kind of there are hidden structures. So he and I wanted to bring a bunch of people we knew had looked at different aspects of this, to put them in a conversation in a book, to focus really in on how the cities across Europe and beyond kind of work on the politics. What's the role of this dialogue between the city, the advocates, the mechanics of planning, and to kind of see how those connect. So my little contribution to it is really in the theorization of that, and how that we can draw on existing work to explore some of those things. There's more going on since then. I'm halfway through the next book, and there is a companion to cycling studies, which will be out in Routledge next week, that Glenn Norcliffe's been holding together. So there's a lot more exciting stuff in that as well. Sheila Hanlon's been doing the section on urban cycling in that one. So there's some ideas or some information. Brian, you've gone quiet.
Oh yeah, is it my internet that's going, or is it yours?
Might well be mine.
No, he's okay. He's just quietly down. He's just said a few things, Brian.
Okay, yeah. Was it me that went? Yeah,
I think you did a bit of a Zoom freeze, Brian.
Ah, terrible. All right, well, thanks for that. Thanks for that intro, Peter. Just wondered, with some of the conversation that we'd heard just before you came on, whether you had any reflections of that, because it's certainly like being very acutely felt the kind of politics at the moment and cycling infrastructure. And the big worry for me over the last few weeks is that there's quite a lot of politicians that see there's political points to be gained and there's votes to be won by pulling stuff out, and how the government responds to that, and how hard. I mean, it's a really interesting time when we're all just seeing it day by day. I just wonder if you had any reflections of that before I move over to Bob, who I think has got a question for you. Hopefully that came through.
Yeah, I think there's a sense in which what's we're at a stage now where what's been theoretical for a long time and just an idea, oh yeah, we need to think about planning that, we need to think about delivering that, and oh yeah, of course we'll do it when the money arrives. And actually now there seems to be a point at which shit is hitting fan and bits are going everywhere, because actually people have been just talking at trying to keep everybody happy on all sides, and now actually having to face the music and deliver. And that's, I think, putting certain things to the test, because it's kind of now, oh bugger, we've either got to do it and we don't know how we're doing it, we've just been bullshitting for ages, or we don't risk doing it because it will give us an image that we don't want, or we don't dare have, or we've got to actually deliver. And especially with now the realization that financial withdrawing of finances is a real thing, and it might actually have knock-on effects if they piss around a lot longer. Pardon my language.
Yeah, no, I think you're right there. There's a bit in the gear change document where, by all means, stick your hand up if you need a question, or might not know you're talking, or I'll just have a conversation with Peter. But there's a bit in gear change when Boris mentions it, and he talks about the revolution that's got to happen in transport is of equal value to when cars started taking over. That kind of level of change is going to happen in the active way. So I know there's a bit in the book where you're kind of thinking, do people really get the scale of the challenge? So we've got the Prime Minister saying, this is the scale of the challenge. And then, can we adjust anything locally? Go for it, Peter.
Yeah, and I think we're now at the stage where the argument's been won. The challenge is there. The gear change and that have delivered the kind of framework, and it's that translating and realizing that framework has now got to be delivered. So much has been said. They can't just walk away now. They can't just keep there is a point where stalling becomes political embarrassment, and I think that's kind of an interesting point now that we're arriving at.
Yeah, you might as well just do it, because we talked about it long enough. That's really good. I'll bring Steve in. Steve, fire away.
Yeah, just a quick one. My thought on whether to kick off or play nicely is usually kick off, because when you get into a conversation with politicians who've not carried out what they were promised, if you get into conversation with them, they quite often want to go in that direction. But if you give if you create the space of a really strong position, it flares up, then they have the kind of wherewithal to make a change. So I err on the side of kicking off rather than playing nicely. Chris, that goes back to your point in Cheltenham, whether you should have given them a rougher ride, really.
Have you got any reflections on that, Peter? I'll make the case for playing nicely in a minute, but I wonder what Peter thinks on that.
I think I don't think there's a universal solution to this one. Actually, sometimes I'm generally in favour of kicking off, but that's me, and I'm like that. But on the other hand, depends how trustworthy and those levels of trust that are going on with the people that you're playing nicely with. Is playing nicely and having conversations, including everybody, just another delaying tactic to keep things out of the way, or is actually that strategically useful to keep on board so that you've got leverage? And if you haven't got leverage, then it's about just getting in there, kicking off, embarrassing them, and using that as leverage. Where's the point of power? Where's the point of leverage? And that would be my overall determining factor. And it does depend where you are, who you're with, and what their situation is vis-a-vis whether it's the electorate or whether it's their budgeting, fiscal response, sense of fiscal responsibility. All of those things actually feed in. So I'd kind of say I like kicking off rather than playing nicely, but sometimes it's strategically or useful, sometimes it's tactically useful, and you've got to balance those out, and it's a dodgy one to get right.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add from my perspective, it's nice if you support the officers, but a good kickoff can really help an officer actually deliver the scheme that they really want to do anyway. That's I always like to twist it and do best of both worlds, but my perspective on it. Simon, did you want to come in? Have you next with the hand up, Simon?
Hiya. Yeah, I mean, I think Peter just kind of nailed it. In, you know, I'm very much a play nice person in general, but yeah, I'd still say Peter nailed it there. Like, so much of this depends on where your point of leverage is and what you think you can achieve and stuff like that. You know, and I guess so I was going to make 2 points. One very quickly was, like, the issue here is on a regional and national basis. Individual councils can slide under the radar by not doing much at all. They can kind of hide. You know, we've got in outer London, we've got councils who are still yet to declare a climate emergency, you know, who are in fact one council where they're visibly openly kind of staffed by climate denial, you know. So we've still got a long way to go to persuade some councils, some boroughs, to really get moving on this agenda. And for them, they don't have to bid for active travel funding. If they're defunded, it's not a massive deal for them. But the problem is, if there's enough of those councils who are just fundamentally unwilling to do anything, that's a problem for, you know, Bexley or Havering or Hillingdon or whatever. But it's also a problem for our mayor. It's a problem for Boris nationally. If there's enough councils who do sod all, then defunding those councils doesn't actually get us far enough, you know. So Will Norman talks about coalition of the willing, you know, so does Sadiq. You know, we have these boroughs that are rushing forward to do stuff. They're running, they're trying to do stuff, you know, sometimes they're faltering a bit, but broadly they're getting on. But is that enough? And I think that's on a regional and national basis, that's a real big question. On Peter's point about, like, where the point of leverage is, you know, if you can get a councillor, if you can get a council leader or a cabinet leader to stand up and say, we need to do this, this is the right thing to do, we need to take a step forward. You know, if you can get councils to show leadership, you know, there seems to be the forgotten art of councillors is to actually articulate a position rather than be led by residents and say, this is why we need to do stuff, make a case. Then you should be very nice. You know, that's the moment to play nice. And that's also the moment to say, you know, yeah, we might disagree on some stuff, but we're going to get in behind you, push forward. If a council is basically saying, I will let the electorate do whatever they want, and they're broadly saying, stuff you all, like, who cares about the climate, I like my car, then there's very little to lose at that point from saying, we're going to fight back. So I think it is about making those decisions about when to be nice and when to be nasty. And I always think, the final point I was going to make was, I always think trying to leave the councils to have an out, you know, a climb down position. If you just go, you're evil and I hate you, that doesn't really result in anything other than doubling down, anything other than hardening up the position. You have to say, you've got it wrong, but hey, you could do this, you could go this way. All we need to do is just change 3% of your direction and you're off, you know, you're off and running and we'll back you. So it's always really important to give these folks somewhere to go, not just back them into a corner.
Yeah, I mean, I'd back that. I say that a lot. There's always something that a council does well. So you go, okay, while we're arguing about this, can you do loads more of that? that goes a long way. I'll bring in Sally now, because I think she was next in.
I think there's a lot to be said for not thinking about it in terms of being nice and nasty and actually just documenting what happens. So you just and making quite a big part of what you do, what your work is, not all behind the scenes talking, but just publish, you know, have a website, put on it, the council said this is what they did, now they're doing this is what they said, this is what they did, and just it's fairly neutral. But I think but local authorities will look at that, and they don't like being criticized, and they will, you know, if they think they're being scrutinized, I think it helps. I don't think we try to do that. I don't know that we always keep up with it. But I was going to ask Peter, sort of going back to that point about sort of we've won the battle, sort of perhaps in terms of having kind of policy there that's better than we've had previously. How do we then, and picking up on what some other people have said about the different stages that different places are at, how do you kind of think about those, how those different, the stages those different places are at? Because I don't think the politics is the same everywhere. I know that when Newcastle first received money as part of the Cycle City Ambition Fund, it went into it with sort of a bit innocent, really. You know, it was stung from every single direction, found its feet again, there's now a lot more support in the city for cycling because it tried to do something. There's also a lot more backlash. And, you know, it's a kind of, we're kind of further down that road. And then there are other places that have more recently tried, you know, so we can see that they're on that very different. Yeah. And I suppose I kind of wondered what you thought about that in terms of the politics and how kind of context specific that is, how generalizable it is for us to say, well, you should do this or you should do that if you want to win support.
My perspective is that it's incredibly diverse. I mean, my local authority is not a shining example for joining up anything. It talks bollocks and it declares things and then does nothing. It's got a track record of that, where you've got so many different administrative formats, so many different kind of scales of local government, and so many different levels of competence spread around, whether you're in cities or whether boroughs that form part of city regions. It's so problematic in the UK that we really kind of, I would say, we can't do that. We can't even kind of map it sensibly and say, look, there is a general progression of stages that you reach. It doesn't work like that because it's the whole structure of local government is too fragmented, is too diverse. I do think, you know, we've got a chronic problem of governance and local government in the UK, and I can't see that being addressed anytime soon. However, there are, that I was saying to Brian the other week, that does lead you into positions where, you know, spot the weaknesses, spot the opportunities in the problem area that you're in, because it may be that those aren't unique to that area, to that area's history and its local government successes and failings in the past, and the politics of local identities and local issues, which also track back in history.
Yeah, I mean, I just had to, I think the great battle of the last few years has been to get local councils to actually do schemes again, to actually feel they can change anything. That's been the big thing that I come across, that everybody's just stuck in a maintenance rut, and that's why I've been supporting the ones that did pop-ups, even if they pulled them out, so that actually changed something. So certainly where I live, nothing's changed for 35 years. It's not looking like changing for the next 35. I'll bring in Graham now. Graham, thanks for being patient. And then Claire next, thanks.
I wanted to say something quite simple, Brian, and that is that I live in Oxfordshire, and most people don't know the difference between the county council and the city council. The county council does highways, the city council does some road making and some changes on the road. And the county council, it seems to me that most of the schemes are designed by consultants. And so if you work for Wood or ACOM or Skanska or Milestone, those companies could have brilliant designers. They could employ Brian Deegan even. But the chance of Brian Deegan being available to work on a scheme, or even to work on a scheme for more than 5 minutes, is negligible. And so what we have now is chief officers who aren't professionals, they're project managers. We have senior officers who might be engineers, but that, dare I say, they may not be very good because they don't work for Woods or Skanska or Milestone. And then I don't know whether any of, one of the things I learned when I studied urban design was financial feasibility. Never taught in architecture, never. If you work for a consultant, you cannot afford to think. You can only produce the lowest common solution unless you're forced to produce something else. And so when you're, and many of fellows on the fellow people on the session talk about the councils, if it's Oxfordshire, you're talking about Milestone. And so the chance of actually speaking to Milestone or getting them to do more than change a single transition curb into a double transition curb, I mean, it's a brilliant barrier to any kind of change. So I think more often we should, please could everybody say whether it's consultants who produce this bloody scheme or whether it's the council. In my council, I don't think anybody could produce a scheme.
Yeah, that's a good point, Al. Yeah, it reminds me, Peter, of the chapter from Austria, which you know is my favourite chapter on the imagination of the technical staff. Do you want to come back on that, Peter?
Yeah, that was a fascinating study by Tadej, and he produced this huge survey of those involved in planning decisions in Austria, and looked at their competence, their skills, their knowledge, their attitudes, and kind of showed the pervasive, I think the word can only be, is ignorance, but I don't mean that in a really damning way, although it is pretty damning, that the majority of officers just didn't know what to do, what their responsibility for it is, or how to address that lack of knowledge. Partly because that lack of knowledge is a lack of knowledge about their lack of knowledge. So there's kind of double layers in there. And those that did have some level of competence or knowledge, understanding that there's something to be done, are stuck because there's so little development training. So they're left with the information that they were given when they trained, which maybe 20 years ago, which was taught by people who knew the information that they'd had when they trained. So there's 40 years time lag, basically, in the expertise in a lot of cases. So, and that's that was across Austria, and it wasn't kind of a localized. They found it wasn't a localized problem at all. It was pervasive across the entire nation. It would be really interesting to kind of be given the funds to do that sort of work here. Just so happens there's a very progressive Austrian mobility fund coming out of government that's funding work like that and getting people to work with to connect with both administrators and planners to connect up the state of the art of what we know and what works and what doesn't work and what needs to be done with those in a position to actually deliver it. But that's a kind of that is a different imperative to government talking, oh look, we need to do this. Yeah, then well fund it. You know, not just the delivery, but also the competence of those who you're saying, look, You've got to work out what it means in your area. Well, yes, but they can only do that if they're given the support to actually train. We need counsellors and professionals to be professionals and to be better professionals. And that's not saying they're not good professionals, but it's kind of saying we can always improve, and we always, I've got the privilege. I'm paid to read this stuff. Because I'm teaching undergraduates and I've got to keep up with the material. But in terms of the practical delivery, I'm way behind, because I haven't been in face-to-face down to earth campaigns for years now. So I'm aware that my gaps are those 20-year gaps that are working the other way around in delivery mechanisms. So yeah.
Yeah,
Well
that's brilliant. But certainly that was kind of why we started doing the Be a Champion course in Greater Manchester, just to open people's minds to the possibilities of it, given that all my profession, highway engineers, are trained in design manual for roads and bridges, which doesn't have any footways. I've just been added a cycling section. Yeah, we got a long way to go to retrain, but I think that's a key one. I'll move over to Claire now. Thanks for waiting patiently, and then we'll do Philip.
Thanks, Brian. That's cool. Yeah, just a couple of points. One is I think this need to kind of push cultural change. So it feels like we now know what we should be doing. We've got, in part, policies in place nationally that say you should be doing this. We've got some sticks as well. One of the things I feel we're at is, it's a problem of execution, and that's where, this cultural change that's needed within effectively the transport planning sector is still, I know you've done a bit of training, Brian, but it still seems like it's not happening fast enough. Cultural change doesn't happen overnight, does it? So it's like you did that series of courses, but as anyone knows who's worked in like big kind of change programs, it's like it's got to be like an ongoing thing. So it's one reason why I've come round to the idea of things like play streets, open streets, school streets, any kind of temporary things that basically get these transport planners, highways engineers having to think differently. We've just done something in Manchester, and we've engaged with our council about what orders were needed. And so we're just asking simple questions, but they were questions that they'd never had to think about before. And actually it made me realise that the conversations we were having, there wasn't it wasn't a fight. It was just they'd never had to answer these questions before. So there's real cultural change needed. So that's one reason why doing these kind of softer temporary things, I think, can help with that. But having said that, I spotted something in the decarbonisation plan, which I just really hope comes to fruition, which is this section in the plan about this emphasis on the local transport plans, and how, at the moment, the only punishment for councils that don't do anything is to be told, well, you're not going to get any money to do anything. That's not really a punishment. Whereas it seems like if the powers like Gilligan win, then we're going to get, transport plans that basically you won't get any funding for anything if you don't do it, because your whole transport plan's got to say how you're going to deliver to net zero. So that's like just a reminder that we all need collectively to put pressure on wherever we can to kind of help make that happen, however we do that. On which subject is the reminder that the battle for Active Travel England is happening at the moment, and whether or not Active Travel England will be a body with its own identity and teeth like Highways England, or whether it will be some sort of lapdog department of the DFT. That's going on right now. So again, whoever's got any power or influence, it's like we need to help. That's going on right now. And at that select committee that someone highlighted, that Shaps was at, he talked to this, and he had the Secretary of State, or whatever they're called, the civil servant next to him, and she was quite kind of, they're not used to, civil servants don't usually speak out about much, but she said something like, no, we are determined that Active Travel England will be a substantive body with substantive powers, or something like that. I can't remember. Anyway, so, just a little reminder on that as well. Thanks.
Yeah, I watched that bit as well. But yeah, you kind of started off a little bit. Just I'm trying to relate it all to Peter's book, and there's a bit about like the insurgent infrastructure, which was one of my favourite little quotes in there. So yeah, Peter, do you want to come back to Claire in general? And I have to say, Claire, like the point that you were making last summer, and I think a lot of things go into it about like the mass behaviour change. I think it's starting to seep through now, and I'm claiming you as the first citation of that, and it reminded me a bit of that as well. Peter, sorry, we're here to hear from you. I'll stop chipping in.
You're muted, Peter.
Trying to find the button. Yeah, so just kind of thinking on what Claire was saying, those that, you know, oh, they've never really been asked those questions, and it's there that our competitive bid funding is a real devastating, because nobody ever gets a chance to catch up, because those who are weak, those authorities which are weak in skills and weak in knowledge, will never put a worthwhile bid together because of their weak in skills and weak in knowledge. Therefore, they will never get in contact with those who are actually got some ideas, got some go ahead, and got some. So it just increases the inequality between authorities that way, and that's, you know, that's where we do really need kind of to break that idea that kind of, well, you know, the best one's going to win. Well, no, competitive funding is devastating on that, because it just further increases the inequalities. Now, that doesn't mean that you just give everybody the money and say, do it. You say, okay, you've got a responsibility to do it. This is the funding. This is the requirement for what you're doing. And I think that's possible that it might happen with the current structure, but I don't know. I'm not entirely confident that the funding mechanism and the threat of withdrawal is quite right. I think it's getting there, but it's when you've got a situation of chronic underfunding of all local authority bits, and this is where you can't just deal with. It's not just about transport. It's, you know, it's not just about cycling either. It's actually part of your whole planning, your communities. Where are you building? Where are you selling land off to put new housing? And is that woven into a kind of the big plan? You don't have to have a master plan, but, you know, is that woven into joined up thinking and joined up administration?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm totally into that. So I'm always of the leave no one behind school, and you just like trying harder to get them in. So I'm buying that. Philip, I'll bring you in. Then I go to Scott and then Simon.
Yeah, just my observations as someone who's worked in the public sector for about 25 years, and you know, there's a kind of hollowing out that people have mentioned in the chat in councils, and it started with the kind of commissioning model, which sounds great in theory, but the experienced deliverers, if I could call it that, essentially a lot of people retired, have left, moved to the private sector, and so to quote Donald Rumsfeld, there's people who don't know what they don't know, and there's so you can't commission if you've not got direct experience of what it is that you want your consultants to do. And when your consultants produce a report, you need to be able to appraise that and critique it and tell whether it's worth the paper it's written on. And unfortunately, it's not always the case. So it's something that takes time, as you've found in Manchester, to kind of to reconstruct that capability. Meanwhile, I think from a political point of view, I think there's I'm going to speak up in defense of politicians, actually, to some of them who are pro-cycling, because it's a very difficult situation to get things right. Occasionally, they are looking for, they're trying to get a quick win, but they know that it's going to take time to bring in that capability. And sometimes the campaigning is oppositional. And when they suddenly get a councillor who's actually on board, that doesn't necessarily change to a more collaborative campaigning. And so you get a politician who's perhaps stuck their neck out to please part of the electorate, but they're getting criticised by everybody, by the motorists who are unhappy with them doing that, and they're criticised by maybe some of the officers and some of the campaigners who are saying this scheme isn't good enough. So it's a really tricky, delicate path to tread, because I think we're used to hearing from the early adopters. Everyone on this call is really in that category, but there are a lot of people out there. If you go outside, you speak to them, they're not on the same page yet, and that's the group we've got to work with. The last point really is just the transport decarbonisation process has really started to highlight that even if you've got a climate emergency that you've declared, you're climate aware, but you're maybe not yet prepared for the scale of the change that's coming and that's needed. And I think that we've got quite a big challenge ahead as a society there, which is going to test everybody. And hopefully we won't end up with a kind of like the Gilets jaunes situation in France, where they took a bit of a hammering for a while. But we've got to do it because our kids and future generations and the planet need it. And so it's just a few of my own sort of observations.
No, that's great, Philip. I want to give Bob a little bit of chance to come in, but I want to hear the rest of the comments as well. So maybe we could take like the comments one after another, and I'll ask Peter to summarize, because he's got a big brain. You can remember it all. I'd struggle to remember it. So I'll go to Scott first, then Simon, then Sally, and then we'll go back to Peter and leave a bit of time for Bob. Sound good? Scott,
thank you, Brian. I just wanted to make a couple of observations from sort of the last year and the changes that we've seen sort of from a policy level from government. It does feel to me, and I think some of the comments suggest this. I mean, I'm in Kent and Sussex, and it looks to me that the local authorities don't really understand that this kind of change, this sort of step change and sort of guidance and direction, and that as a result, that I still get the impression that they feel that they can kind of do business as usual, old school kind of approach, and just ask for more money. And I think related to that, my concern that I see is that it appears that there are parts of the country where there is some political will and some leadership to do things, and that we could end up with sort of like a two-tier of communities around the country. We have the ones that kind of get it and take the money and do a good job, and we have the ones that are sort of still absolutely determined that the car must be first, and that we see sort of some separation, if you like, in communities. And related to that point, in a county like Kent and plenty of others as well, where you have the kind of the county council with the highways authority, and then you have the sort of local authorities within the county who are putting schemes forward for things like we've had with the Active Travel Fund. It's very easy from where I sit, because I'm seeing it happening, that councils who are not on board, or even individual powerful councillors, can easily hide the fact that they're killing active travel in their local community, as long as the county council still submits some bids. So you can have campaign groups in areas, and I see this in Kent, where there's a good campaign, they're trying to get active travel on the radar, but some influential local councillors go to County Hall and basically say, you're not doing anything in my town, so give someone else the bid. And so we see, even where there's opportunities for funding, that some of the stuff's being thwarted almost behind the scenes, and it's lost, because as long as the county council submits some schemes, they're doing what they're being asked to do, regardless of the quality of those schemes. So it's kind of strange times, but I just want to make some of those observations.
That's great, really good. Scott, okay, Simon, that's
Yeah, I think there's been some stuff in the chat, and I think what Scott's just said, and others are saying, like, to me, at the end of the day, officers are the wrong end of the telescope, as it were. Like, with no disrespect to officers are here, ultimately, it is all about the councillors. It's all about the political lead. If you could have, I've seen this so many times, great officers, brilliant officers in absolutely shockingly poor, weak boroughs, and they just languish, and it's just disheartening and horrible. And so you've got to campaign directly towards the transport lead, the political lead. And we have some tools now, we have some levers that we all have, in the climate emergency, in, defunding, in all these issues. And what's fantastically, spectacularly amazing to me is how poorly briefed most of these councillors, particularly the ones that are weak, are, and how they think they can skate through this stuff. So it's our job now, I think, and to be very clear, I'm not the one advocating let's go and have a riot and, be the Gilets jaunes or whatever. Like, I'm saying, in a very constructive way, and Sally's point about holding them to account, etc. But like, find the right way with your local councillor to get them to listen and hear, because they're not listening at the moment. They're not hearing in far too many areas of England and beyond. But get them to listen and hear and start to move forwards, because otherwise we are all screwed on climate. It's as simple as that. So I think, and I just, without pointing out, like talking about play streets and stuff like that as a soft way to start engaging with council, with officers and stuff. Yeah, if you can skill up some officers, great. But ultimately, you can have amazing, fantastic skilled officers. I've dealt with consultants who've written brilliant reports, and it just all gets eviscerated when it goes up to the political level. So it's got to be the focus has to be laser on the political level. And in the reverse, I've seen councils where the political level has shifted, where you start to get political will, and the officers are dreadful. And I've literally had to turn around to in London boroughs, turn around to politicians and say, you are being lied to by your officers. This is absolutely not true. They've gone away, checked that I'm right, check what the officer said, and come back and gone, oh, okay, yeah. So in those situations where political will starts to develop and the officers aren't there is opportunities to skill up officers. There is opportunity to put the pressure on the officer cadre and say, now is the time to do some CPD, some professional development. You need to look, here's LTN 120, read this, etc. So there's a bunch of stuff that can be done with officers once you've got the political will. Ultimately put the pressure on officers. They either improve or they ship out or whatever. But there is a real opportunity to get officers moving, and I've seen it happen even in boroughs where there's no funding at all, like nothing going on. But a bit of political will starts that process moving. No political will, you're stuck forever. Doesn't matter what your officers are like, really.
Yeah, every project needs good politics. Sally.
I'm going to change the subject completely. I'd like to ask Peter what other things he thinks might have to change in terms of things that the government could do to help us. And one of the things that's come out of the past 18 months is that they have actually increased the onus on local authorities to do consultation, while at the same time also saying that they have to provide really good reasons if they want to take something out. Now, I'm interested in participation in my research, and my findings are that participation often ends up privileging some people over others. So I wondered, but this is not, well, it's to do with streets, but it's not specifically to do with this kind of infrastructure. And I wondered what your thoughts were about that in relation to where the power balance is and where it ought to be, because obviously participation comes out of something, historically in the UK in planning, it came out of the Skeffington report, and that's still kind of how we're working, even in transport, where it's not like planning, it doesn't apply in the same way, but it's kind of very similar. And I wondered whether you thought we needed a sort of a new Skeffington to examine participation in transport planning and what that might be.
Wow, off you go, Peter. There's a lot to respond to there, and I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, in 4 minutes. Participation, consultation only works if you're getting people to imagine things that they can imagine. If you're just asking them, I mean, Manchester's, what was it, 2 decades ago? Shall we have a scheme that you a congestion charging scheme? We're not going to tell you what it was like, what it will be like. You're not going to have any experience of it. Just, do you think abstractly it's a good idea? Stupid bloody question. So yeah, Stockholm got it right. We suspect that this might be a really good idea. We're going to put it in and then ask you if you want it taken out. Bang, it stays. Vienna did it. Maria Hilferstrasse, big road coming in from the outside into the town, onto the main ring road. But everybody said that's the one you can't close. Yes, we're going to try it. We're going to experiment. Oh yeah, actually, brilliant. Thank you. So participation consultation is not just asking questions, and that means that also I think that's got to be tied in with the other point that Simon made and you touched on, that I'm really convinced now that climate is the game changer. We have to decarbonize. We've agreed internationally we have to decarbonize. So let's get that as a leverage. So any consultation is kind of, okay, we've got to meet these targets. We've got to have a zero, we've got to get to target zero. So how are we going to do it? Right, these are the options we can talk about. What we can't do is do nothing. Therefore, something's got to shift, right? We know, and we can point to the experience of things that have worked and the effects that have worked elsewhere, even if we can't put something in temporarily. But I think that's the international commitments that filter down to national commitments that filter down to local obligations to meet emissions targets have got to be centralized to that consultation process. So you can't just say, shall we do this? Things have got to change. How have they got to change? These are, which is going to hurt least? Which are going to be the least worst option if you're really being cynical? But actually, we know that this particular option gives something really good. These are the benefits that have been found in this one. These are the benefits that have been found in this alternative. But what we're not doing is saying, do we want something or not? Because that's business as usual, and that is no longer an option. And that's and we've got to actually really capitalize on that from my perspective. So I think it's changing our understanding and the political understanding of what consultation participation means in light of the fact that we've got to make changes and that not changing is not an option. And I think that's for me, that's become a real game changer. We've had 25 years where, oh, well, we don't really have to do anything and it'll work out. There's international political agreement that doesn't work anymore. So that's my stance on it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good, it reminds me, it's gone full circle to the Andrew Gilligan argument, because he was always like on the East-West Superhighway, it's going to happen, deal with it. And I remember saying to colleagues, like, there's no, are we gonna, just how do we make the least worst situation? That's exactly how I framed it. And so, yeah, I'm with you there. Bob, come in.
Okay, can I do my presentation now?
Do you think we've got time, Bob, or do you want to, because I want to have a bit of a discussion
I'd
next week.
kind of like to, if Peter can stay, and maybe we run over a little tiny bit.
I think we'll struggle to run over, because I know people have got commitments, and I know Ruth's got a video as well that she wants to show. She's done her last word on there, and I kind of want to have your work. I'm like a blowing air here, but I want to have a proper discussion on your stuff as well. What
I mean, it's
got about 3 minutes left.
I wanted to do it because basically there's a work in progress which I'm doing with Ian Walker, who you know, who's now professor at Surrey University, and Tim Gamble, and it's about discourses of denial. And you may have seen some stuff on by Giulio Maccioli on that with regard to climate change. And I was on the Cycle City thing after Peter, and basically I'm a sociologist like Peter, and Ian and Tim are psychologists, so coming at it from slightly different directions. And what I'm saying, I think, yeah, okay, I'll do the presentation next week so we can kind of follow it on then. But what I was, yeah, I'm following on with all these things, like the big thing is that before we'd say, oh, it's nicer for the environment, oh, it's nicer for the kids playing out, oh, it's nicer for this, it's nice for that. Now it's you have to do this thing because of climate change. And the government has said this, and it has said, if you can't do this, what is your alternative? So that's kind of changing the way we look at it. That's an absolutely fundamental way of changing it, if we have the kind of leverage we hope that Gilligan has. What I wanted to talk about, though, was also that I think there's is something that I was beginning to talk about with Paul Gannon on Twitter, where I think we have to look at the background elements of what we're up against, more specifically in society as a whole, with the kind of people who oppose LTNs, but it filters through to the politicians. And it's about the sort of assumptions which most people have with regard to what they think about traffic and cars and who the roads belong to. And it's relevant in terms of safety and unconscious bias and hidden agendas and background assumptions, sort of things that sociologists talk about. What I'm going to try and suggest next week, since we have to roll on to that then, is that we actually have to try and sort of grapple with that. And Paul was saying more, I hope I don't misrepresent him, he was saying, you know, let's just try and get more, you know, one scheme in here, another scheme in there, and we'll get, you know, bits and pieces, and we'll kind of get it in without sort of confronting the great British motoring public. My view is that actually we do have to, I wouldn't say confront or make a fuss or whatever, but challenge the assumptions of the great British motoring public, because look at what's happened. A lot of stuff has come out, even without inconveniencing motorists very much. Annie Hidalgo in Paris has quite happily said, take out 30,000 car parking space. That sort of thing isn't happening here in Britain. And I'm saying that in, you know, without being aggressive or rude or violent or anything, we do have to kind of challenge assumptions in various ways. And that will be with the public at large, it will be in the media, and basically the kind of shit that we get from people like Janet Street Porter saying all cyclists are arrogant and so on. We have to actually come back and say why that is unacceptable, why it is intolerable.
I think we should actually come back and have a proper discussion this
yeah
because
I'll do that next week.
I need you to hold back that fire so we can give you like the full session, but but that's what I'm going to be sort of talking about next week, and it'll be just a 10-minute updated presentation. It's work in progress, which the three of us, Ian, Tim and me, are doing, and it's about an area which I think we have to look at. All right, let's go. But I just want to thank Peter as well for brilliant. I thought that was a brilliant session tonight. Everybody was on form, and kind of feel we're unpicking some great mystery here. And I'm looking forward to finding out what the answers are for the people here. But we'll go over. Ruth's recorded her last word special for us, and Steve's going to play it for us now. And then I'll see you all next week when the the mystery will continue. There she is.
You got that, Brian?
Yeah, got it.
Hang on. Oh, sorry, hang on.
Getting nice and sunny there.
I'm recording this from the amazing new F261 Tilburg to Walwijk. As you can see, I'm recording as I'm cycling. There are no vehicles, no cars, just Jan behind me. We are parallel to the equivalent of M1, M6, and it is extraordinary. They've obviously cut into the farmland, the grass, the trees, to create this safe space for cycling. It's 19 kilometres, I think, and it just means the first part of it went through the university, and we saw loads of students using it. It was like something else. Yesterday, we cycled for 3 hours in absolutely torrential rain, but we were on all separated cycle routes all the way from Willemstad to Tilburg. There's no way we could have done that on normal roads. If we want gear change to happen, we're going to have the money spent to separate cycling from cars. We saw school students, teenagers on all sorts of bikes, laughing, chattering away in spite of the weather because they were doing their school run by bike. It's just something else. We do need separation. Thank you. Bye.